Oh, we have to go over to your house.
Find out, right? I won't spoil it for you. How's that? I won't spoil it for you. How's that? I do have a laser pointer, so this way. Yep. We do have another one here. I see you could play with it.
Don't give him that.
Yeah, drive the cats crazy.
Hey, John. I want to welcome everybody tonight to the public forum regarding Smith's Bridge. Tonight we have our engineers who did the inspection report. They're going to go through a short presentation, and after the presentation we'll take questions from the audience. I'll come around with a microphone to get everybody's questions so everybody can hear it. In fairness to everybody will get one question before we come back for the second question. So with that, we'll introduce Don and John, both from Fleece and Vandenberg.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm just going to give some opening remarks and then turn it over to John Moxie here. John is our lead structural engineer with our firm, and he is certified with MDOT to do bridge inspections. He does a number of these every year, as well as bridge design. So just wanted to give a little introduction on John's qualifications. We conducted a second inspection as requested, I think, by many of you citizens here for the city of Ferrysburg. And we conducted that second inspection of the bridge on August 1 of this year. And then we assembled our report and gave it to the city, probably about a week and a half ago. and then they posted it on their website. So I think many of you may have already seen our inspection report off their website. We're just going to go through the report. We have some photos. Many of the photos were in that report, so you'll see some of this stuff already previously probably, but we just want to go through and explain what we found and then talk about maybe some of the solutions that we can consider that's not a total bridge replacement to this to fix a bridge that is stressed. That is something that we did concur with the other inspection reports. So anyways, I'll turn it over to John and he can go through the details.
Thanks, Don. Good evening. It is a bridge engineer's dream to have a room full of people talking about bridges, especially on a late summer night when you could be doing many other things. So appreciate your time, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here to help you with this problem. So without further ado, the agenda for tonight, we're going to go through the background. Many of you have seen this already. We just want to kind of set the tone for what we're going to talk about tonight. We do want to spend some time talking about the layout of this bridge and spend some time educating everyone on what we say when we use certain terms so that everybody's seeing the same thing and we can describe what we're seeing as bridge engineers. We're going to talk about the existing conditions briefly. Again, we were the following inspections, so we'll just run through some of the photos we saw, some of the things that you may or may not have seen as you navigate around that bridge. And then the heart of our presentation starts after that, when we talk about some alternatives that we came up with. We're calling this an evaluation more than just an inspection. We didn't want to leave you with an inspection saying, yes, we concur with what's been done so far and leave it there. So we went beyond that. We developed some alternatives. We're going to talk about potential timelines for implementing some of those alternatives. And then we want to talk a little bit about managing risk. Obviously, the city closed the bridge because there is a significant risk out there. So we want to talk about managing that risk and talk about the ramifications if we conclude that it can be opened again to traffic. We want to be thoughtful about that. And then obviously opening it up for your questions, your time for a discussion. So background on the bridge, originally built by MDOT, 1940s, and then the Road Commission reconstructed it. So the bridge that's out there today dates back to 1972. The city took jurisdiction of it in 1985. Repairs were made in both 89 and 08, in addition to maintenance and some other things that have happened over the years. And then those restrictions really started taking place in the 2010s and quickly progressed during the last decade or so, resulting in the closure in 2019. The last few years, the city has been pursuing funding, knowing that this is an issue. They've been working through the MDOT Local Bridge Program. A millage proposal was put out there, and then the US DOT build grant. So the city's been proactive in trying to get funding to deal with this problem. And here we are with the bridge layout. We prepared this schematic just to help us all visualize the various components of the bridge. This is a cross-section of the bridge taken at one of the piers out in the lake. So I don't know how legible this is. This is in the report. The piers, we'll start from the bottom up. The piers consist of 6 steel H piles that are driven down into the lake bed. Those carry the loads of the structure down into the ground. The concrete, the concrete that you see when you drive your boat around the bridge is actually just a protective jacket, a concrete jacket to protect that steel pile. It's not doing the work, it's protecting the member that is doing the work. Those 6 piles are connected by what we call a pier cap, a concrete pier cap. And then the pier cap is actually what carries the beams. The beams on this bridge consist of 11 beams that carry the traffic, the vehicular traffic. Those are tensioned together to form a bridge deck, and then the asphalt surface is placed on top of that. It's a very common structure type from the 1970s. It was used all the way up through the 1990s, and there are still a few being built today. It's a very economical type of structure to build. It's quick to build, and over the years we found out that it's difficult to maintain, and it has some premature deterioration issues. We'll get to those. Yours is a little bit unique in that you have utility chases on both sides of that vehicular portion of the bridge with a beam separated from this mass here, and then the concrete sidewalks bridge over that utility chase. So when you drive underneath the bridge, you'll see utilities on both sides. That was accommodation made for the various other things that the bridge does, including carrying the traffic. The railings, obviously, protecting pedestrians, protecting vehicles, and we'll move on. We want to talk in depth about the beams, the beams that carry traffic specifically, because those are kind of the heart of why we're here tonight. We call it a box beam because you can see it's shaped like a box. The ones that are carrying vehicular traffic are 21 inches deep, 36 inches wide, and they actually have 2 cells. So it actually forms kind of a 2 square in each beam. Each of those 11 beams looks like this. The top flange, we call it, of that beam, 4 inches thick, and as we sandwich those beams together, that forms the deck. That's doing the work of carrying vehicles. That has some reinforcing in it. It has just plain regular rebar like you'd find in any of your homes probably, in your footings, in your walls, things like that. And again, it's just concrete, and then the asphalt wearing surface goes on top of there. The bottom surface of that to the top surface, that's at 4 inches right here. That is carrying the wheels basically of your cars. That is preventing you from falling down into these voids that are in the box. The bottom flange, we call it, is full of pre-stressing strands. These are not the normal kind of rebar you find in any construction. What they do is they tension these strands, they cast the concrete, and then they let go. So these strands are pulling the beam tight, putting it in compression. And so when you drive underneath the boat, when you see some areas where these are exposed, that's really the main load carrying part of the beam. That's what's carrying the beam from pier to pier. So you've got the top flange. Its main function is to really carry the riding traffic, make sure we're not falling into the beam itself. And then the bottom flange is really doing the majority of the work, carrying the loads from pier to pier. This is just a view of the top of the beam. This shows some of the reinforcing that's in that beam. This is helping the top of that beam carry your vehicle as you go across. So you've got both longitudinal bars, we call them, because they're going in the long direction of the beam. And then we've got stirrups. They're called stirrups because they're shaped like a U. So the existing conditions, just briefly going through our inspection process, we show this is the FHWA MDOT definition of what numbers correspond to. Everything from a brand new bridge at a 9 down to imminent failure, things like that. So you can see on the right-hand side, again, this is right out of the report. Generally, we're falling right in line with what the original inspection came up with. The MDOT review process says that if you're within 1 rating point up or down of what you're looking at, basically there's no disagreement there. So, and that's generally what we found. We didn't have any significant disagreements with the actual ratings themselves. So looking at the asphalt wearing surface is the first component we want to spend some time on. Basically, that is the pavement that goes right on top of the beams. And actually, in your bridge, it has a waterproofing membrane. Because this bridge is susceptible to this premature deterioration, that's from water making its way through your beams and freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing and starting to cause damage. So the waterproofing membrane is intended to try and keep the water out of your beams, just like your waterproofing is in your roof, say. So you've probably all driven the bridge at some point in time. You've seen something that looks like this. This is the northbound lane here in pretty rough shape. Southbound lane is better, but we've still got some deterioration in the southbound lane. As that asphalt starts to crack, it starts to pop out. We call that spalling. The DPW fixes that by putting in patching, sealing cracks, but really it's beyond the point where mere maintenance is enough to keep this in a good drivable condition. Some pictures, here's one that we found that hasn't been patched yet, and you can see in there that's the waterproofing membrane. That's not the top of the beam that you're seeing there, that's just the black asphaltic membrane there. And then you can see we've got about an inch of wearing surface there on top. So the asphalt is fairly thin. Moving on to the joints, wanted to spend a little bit of time on the joints because, again, water getting through our bridge is the main thing that's causing these issues. What you have is the end of the beams is just blocked out. It's probably better on the right side here. So they create a little block out there, and then they pour concrete in that block out. You can see that in the surface when we get to the photos. And then between those two concrete headers, you have a joint sealant. Basically, it's a strip seal that is intended to keep water from getting down in between our joints and causing issues below. As the strip seal deteriorates over time, DPW has been sealing that, trying to keep that water out. They've been doing a good job of maintaining this bridge as best they can. But again, as we start getting some things spalling along the joints, you can see here where they've had to patch that actual concrete at the surface. It's just more than what maintenance can handle at this point. Moving on to the railings, again, protecting pedestrians and vehicles. You've got a tube railing, again, very, very common type of railing in the 1970s. The only real thing we found out there was a few missing bolts, nothing too significant, especially since it's just really carrying pedestrians at the moment. Something that's pretty easy to fix. Moving on to the sidewalks, again, they're bridging over from the end of the concrete deck box beams to the one that's carrying the sidewalk there. Again, the joint goes all the way across the sidewalk itself. The deck bottom surface is interesting. In this kind of bridge, you can see we can't really see what's going on the bottom surface of the box beam. So that gets rated N for not applicable. Basically, all we're seeing is what you're seeing when you drive your boat under there. We're just seeing the bottom of the beams, and that's not really what's carrying the vehicles. The deck itself is required to be rated. We don't have a choice. This is one of the items that the federal government requires us to rate. So we have to make some educated guesses on what the condition of the deck is. And we do that by looking at the surface, the asphalt surface, and looking at the condition of the bottom of the beams. That tells us, in theory, what the concrete in between those two surfaces looks like. But again, we don't have access to this, so it's a little bit of an educated guess. Moving on to the stringers, the beams themselves. I mentioned that these beams get tensioned together to form that mass of concrete. This is what we call a post-tensioning pocket, where that steel rod goes through the beams, and this is what it looks like, just so you can visualize that these beams are acting together. Just because you have one beam that's in really bad shape, you have other beams that are connected to it to help carry that load. And so we just wanted to kind of show you the lifespan of what one of these beams goes through. First, what we generally see is cracking along the joint between the beams. That's where the water is getting through first, is between these two beams, and it starts to cause cracking. When the cracking gets bad enough, the reinforcing steel inside the beam itself starts to corrode and expand. Steel expands as it corrodes, and so it causes what we call delamination. When this concrete is no longer solidly connected to the rest of the beam, is delaminated, and it's getting closer and closer to spalling off of the beam. And then once that gets bad enough, then you see where the concrete has actually fallen. It's no longer on the beam, it's completely spalled. So you've got a handful of spots throughout the structure where that has occurred. And really, this is the main deficiency that restricts loads on the bridge. Once you start seeing these steel strands, remember they're in tension from 1972 on, they've been in tension to hold that beam together. Once these start corroding, they start snapping, and there's really not a good way to repair those. You can't really reestablish that tension easily. Just some more photos there. Not only in the middle of the spans, but you can see some of that happening on the ends of the spans. Again, those joints up above leak down into the beams and cause that same condition near the ends. But that's a lot of ugly photos. I just want everybody to remember that much of the bridge still looks like this. This is like what it looked like in 1972. You have some pretty large areas that still look like this. And so that's why we think there's still some useful life out there to be had. And we'll go through some of the ideas to do that. The abutments, there's not a lot to say here. They were rated fair. This was the one area we thought they could be even higher than this, probably in a good category. They're missing some of the stone riprap around here. So I think once that goes on again, which is fairly easy to do, the rating on those could come back up. The piers, poor condition. They've had work done over the years. They could use some more work. Again, just some nomenclature. We've got the steel H-piles inside them, surrounded by these concrete jackets. There were some supplemental jackets put on after the 1972 construction. There were some extra jackets put on to repair some damage. And then all of those 6 piles connected by that concrete cap. So some of the deterioration we're seeing in the piers, you can see the utility chase. You've got some leakage there. And then you get cracking in that cap. You can see you've got beam here, beam here, beam here. This beam is being carried directly by this cap to get down to these columns. As the water makes it inside the cap, you get some cracking in the cap vertically, horizontally. You see some patching here on the right side. And actually the worst spot is on that southernmost pier. You can see there's a fairly large spall. And what you're seeing, this exposed steel here, is actually some rods that go from the beams down into the pier cap just to hold them in position. So that whole mass of concrete has now spalled off of there because of the corrosion that's happened inside. Moving down below, here's some of the type of deterioration. You can see this is the extra jacketing that was done to repair stuff like this that was happening along the water line, either as freeze-thaw happens or as boats may bump into that. You're seeing some damage done. So there's more of that to be done to make sure those jackets stay in place so that we're protecting, again, the steel piles that are inside these jackets really doing the work. There's a few items for the approaches. Obviously, if we're spending any kind of money on the bridge itself, we'd want to make sure we're doing something to the approaches. You've got some settlement happening on the sidewalk right at the bridge. That is a very common problem. You've got a bridge that's supported on deep foundation. It's not really going anywhere. And then you have approach pavement that tends to settle over time. So that's very common. We see that all the time. And then again, you've got some cracking in the approaches, but the DPW has been sealing it up. So there's not a lot pavement-wise that we would need to do. So the heart of our presentation, some alternatives to think about. I will say that these are not the only alternatives out there. These are the ones that we thought of for the city to consider. There are certainly other things out there that could be done. We're not suggesting that every single one of these is a good idea. We just wanted to start brainstorming, start thinking about what can be done. So the first one, when ratings get to the level of a 4, a 3, when a bridge is in poor condition, serious condition, we start seeing in the MDOT guidance that further evaluation is needed to see if this bridge can still support traffic. And some of that has been done. The bridge has been load restricted for many years, but really most of the evaluation that's been done has been done on the beams overall, not on that top 4 inches of the beams, which is really the main concern, as we understand it, for why the bridge was closed. So we call this destructive testing. Basically, under this scenario, some of the asphalt would be removed from the tops of those beams, the membrane that covers the beams, and we would core the top of that 4-inch top of the beam, and we would see what's there. There's compression testing that can be done. There's tensile stress testing that can be done, so we can get an idea of how much strength is left in the top of those beams. If we can even get a solid core out of there, we may peel the asphalt off and find that there's not a lot of structure in that top flange, but that's also good to know. That helps us figure out what options are still left for us. We're calling it just very rough ballpark budget, 10 to 15,000, depending on how many cores we want to do. The more cores we do, the more we can feel comfortable with that we're getting good information, but the more holes we're poking in the tops of those beams, which is damage that we're not going to be able to repair. We can fill them, but we're not going to be able to restore that lost strength or seal it up completely. We're seeing this, we say 2 to 5 years. Again, this is really ballpark, nothing that we should plan on. If it fails in 4.5 years, we're wrong. We're just saying if this solution is implemented, we wouldn't want to really go any longer than that. This would really just provide a window for securing funding to do something more. And we're calling the next one semi-destructive testing. Similar scenario, except instead of coring the tops of these beams, we're going to do some non-destructive testing methods. And that ranges everything from just smacking the concrete with a hammer to some more sophisticated testing, just to see what kind of condition the top of the beams are in. Can they support a wheel load? The main concern is that the tops of these beams no longer has the strength to support a wheel, and someone's going to lose a wheel in one of these and have a bad accident. We're saying a little bit less. We don't have to do the coring. The testing itself still costs some money. So again, depending on how widespread we do our testing, we're calling it a $5,000 to $10,000 ballpark range. Again, this would just be an interim step to see if we can get the bridge open to traffic again and satisfy ourselves that something dangerous isn't going to happen in that short window where it takes us hopefully to get some funds. This was more of an outside the box idea. Steel plating is done commonly when you get a hole either in a normal bridge deck, a concrete bridge deck, or in the top of a box beam like this. The grading is something I've never seen or done. It was just kind of an idea that came up as we were thinking about how do we add some safety to the bridge without adding a lot of weight. Steel plate is a fairly large weight to add. Steel grading is open. It doesn't weigh nearly as much, even if we would fill it with asphalt or something like that. The drawback of this is you're allowing a whole lot of holes for that water to get through there. So we're calling this a pretty short-term solution too. Cost could range all over the place depending on whether we just want to address a few spots on the bridge that we find or whether we want to be proactive and try and do the entire bridge. So it's really a wide range of costs. And then we had a little case study. This is to both illustrate what that plating looks like, but also to give you a sense of what does a bridge look like that has holes in the tops of the beams. This one is on the east side of the state. Most of you probably never have to worry about driving on it. It is on a gravel road. And so two things happening. Both the freeze and thaw are happening on the top of this, but also the gravel just wearing on the top of the box beams. They didn't have an asphalt surface on this. Similar vintage, 1973, thought that was significant, and similar span to what you have out there. You have a series of spans that's roughly 40 feet. So again, in this case, they put a fairly large plate over this area because there are some holes in the tops of those beams. This is not a hole, but you can see the concrete has worn off to the point where you can see the steel in the top of the beam, and then the water ponds in here and just compounds the problem. On the right side, hopefully it's not too dark, you can see this is what the bottom side of those same beams looks like. You can see that spalling that we talked about. It is the entire length of just about every beam, and I've got a few more photographs. These might be a little easier to see. Broken strands, a very, very ugly structure. So again, this is really to just set the stage of what does a bridge look like when there's a significant risk of having a hole in the top of the beams. This is what it looks like. You're not there yet. So this, at least in my mind, gives us some reason to hope that once we look at the tops of those beams, we're going to find something better than what's here because the bottom looks much better than what's here. This one actually, the damage was so bad that you can see right into the rod that is connecting these beams. I don't know if you can see it well or not, but you can actually see straight into where that rod is, and that's corroded and very ugly bridge. Next alternative is an overlay of some kind. One of the improvements that was made to this style of bridge that we're talking about is switching from an asphalt surface to an actual concrete deck on top of those box beams. So a concrete overlay basically is recreating that after the fact. The first option would be to not make it a structural member, just to make it a riding surface again. Somewhat thin layer of concrete, again, just to help bridge over any holes that might exist underneath. At the same time, we could repair some of those, but still pretty hefty price tag. We're thinking at least $500,000 to do that, to get you another probably 10 or 15 years. It's not a structural member, so it's still going to crack. It's still going to spall. It's going to need to be patched. And the other drawback to this is we would really need to look at the condition of the beams. We're adding a lot of load to those beams without adding any strength. So we would need to look at, is there enough strength left in those beams to even do this? And that's what led us to more of a structural overlay, which would be a structural connection to those beams. So basically, we're taking that top 4 inches of those beams, repairing it, and making it something closer to 8 or 10 inches thick, more like a normal bridge deck. It's a higher price tag, but it's not that much higher because a lot of the construction is similar in nature. But we think we can add another 15 or 20 years at least by doing something like that. Some of the photos, this isn't one of mine. I found this online. This is actually identical to what we would be talking about. What they've done here is they've removed the wearing surface, the asphalt surface. So what you're seeing here is just the rough tops of the beams that's left. You can see some of the damage that happened to the beams over time or as they were removing the asphalt. And then on the left side here, this is the new overlay that's happened. This is fairly thin. I think this is a non-structural overlay. And then you can just see it. This is a rail that the piece of equipment right here rides on as they're making that concrete smooth, as they're placing that concrete. And on the right side, you can see that same process. This is a conceptual drawing of what that would look like, that last option with a structural overlay. You can see most of the bridge is unchanged. Everything, the beams have not changed, the sidewalks, the railings. Basically what we're doing is we're peeling off that asphalt wearing surface, we're putting in some connection steel, and then we're pouring a new deck on top of everything basically to add strength. So these beams, we're adding load to those beams, but we're also adding a lot of strength. And for the sake of argument, we're showing extending one of the sidewalks. We knew that was something that was important to the city. They're fairly narrow today. They're only 4.5 feet wide. Most citizens are used to now having free reign of this bridge, so we thought it would be nice to at least show that. Not that that's needs to be done. The sidewalk portion again would be a structural component of the bridge to help carry some of the beams underneath. We would narrow up the driving lanes to do this if this was chosen. There's more than enough width out there now for 2 lanes of traffic. So we would take some of that width and put it into non-motorized. Some other needs. Again, spending this much money on a bridge, trying to get this much life out of it, we want to make sure we address some other needs to take a holistic approach. The biggest of those being pier repairs. What we don't want to do is add life to the top of the bridge and then watch the bottom continue to crumble. So we would want to coordinate scope of work with the superstructure work. The more work that we add up top, the more we're going to try to add life underneath. Sidewalk widening, I mentioned, again, that would be optional depending on what the city's preference was there. Joint replacement, again, we really need to keep water out of this structure, so that's an important part of whatever we do. Again, we can add a little bit of rock to some of the abutments just to bring those back up to a good condition. The bridge that's out there today gets a special underwater inspection. So back in 2017, there were divers out and they looked at everything underneath the water. It's deep enough that we can't really inspect it from the surface. So that's a special inspection that happens. And they identified some repairs or some investigation to be done on protecting the structure from boat traffic, basically. We wouldn't want to have a situation where a boat got off course and ran into a pier and honestly, we wouldn't want to hurt the boat either. So there's some things that can be done to help folks navigate around it without doing damage to either one. The approach work, again, especially if we were to do something with the sidewalk, we'd really want to either transition from the wider sidewalk on the bridge to your normal sidewalk or extend that out a certain distance. And then the note at the bottom here, ongoing maintenance. No matter what we do to the bridge, the DPW is going to be busy with this bridge, just keeping track of it, making sure that that these repairs are effective and that they're well maintained. So timeframes for implementation. We've got a couple of different scenarios here depending on how MDOT views us as the option that we focused on. So further evaluation, those two options that involve peeling off some asphalt and taking a look at the tops of the beams sometime in the fall. And then that would be a point where we'd have some kind of a report potentially to bring to the city and say, here's what we found. What is the comfort level with opening this to traffic again on a short-term basis? If that were to be open to traffic, it would most likely come with some additional load restrictions. The bridge was posted at a 20-ton limit when it was closed. That would probably get reduced to something less. And then another option that we would recommend is once we do that, we would want to increase the inspection frequency. Right now, it's getting looked at every year. There are bridges in the state that get looked at every month. So that can happen, and that, again, is just trying to mitigate some of that risk. So while that's happening, the MDOT is reviewing the city's 2019 application. They meet on October 14 to select the bridges that they are going to fund in that funding cycle. So there is a chance that the bridge gets selected on October 14th and it moves forward with replacement. And everything I just showed you is kind of moot. Based on the dollar value, we're not sure whether it's something that the bridge program can handle. You've seen that the past 3 years. So we're not banking on that. But that, I just want to point out, is still the preferred option. If that works, that is the recommendation, no question. So if it's not successful, the first thing we would do is explore the same bridge program has an emergency process. Now, I will couch that by saying the emergency process is really set up for things like a collision, something out of the ordinary, not just a bridge getting older and older and older and then needing to be replaced. So we would explore that. It's still it was a very sudden thing that happened. It's obviously a high-profile bridge. I can only think of one other project I've had the governor out to look at. So it's out there. We think that adds some merit to where we might be able to justify an emergency application. We've got some calls into MDOT. Unfortunately, I don't have anything for you tonight, but that's in the works to at least explore that. So if that is appropriate and approved, just because we're eligible for that doesn't mean we're automatically approved. It still would need to be approved by a board. Then the city could move into design early in 2020 already. And basically what that is taking our October 14th, we find out whether we got what we really want to do. Then we move into submitting the application gets reviewed. And then once we find out if we've got some funding, we can start designing something. Wanted to run you through a case study. One of the projects we worked on that used this mechanism. This is down in Breedsville, Van Buren County. And what they had is a two-span bridge, and that they had this steel pier that they had a partial collapse on. We suspect it was an overload. They've got a lot of agricultural traffic in that area. We think overnight that someone overloaded and part of that pier cap crushed. So December 10, 2015, he's holding here that rod. This is a similar type of bridge to what you've got. That rod that runs between these beams and tensions them together completely snapped as this thing collapsed. So we met with the village council January 12th, the next year, about a month later, and presented some options that we came up with, much like what we're doing here tonight. And then the village authorized an emergency application on January 22. We submitted that on February 3, and then they got back to us. They moved pretty quick. You can see only about 2 weeks there, mid-February. And then we kicked off design March 1st of 2016 and had it wrapped up about 9 months. You can see pretty quick design process. March 1 to January 6th the next year was the MDOT letting, and then began construction in February. And then this is the new bridge that they've got, July 28. That was with some delays in construction even. So December 2015 to July 2017 is basically the timeline there. This was for a full replacement. And I always point out it is blue because there are a lot of blueberry growers in the area that participated in this project, really made it happen. So they recognize that by painting it blueberry blue. This is option B. If our emergency application doesn't work, if they say, nope, this is just deterioration, this is not a fit, our next option would be to go back to the local bridge program in 2020 funding round and say, we're not looking for $12 million to replace the bridge. We'd like, say, $1 million to really bring this up to get it open for the next, say, 20, 25 years. So that application cycle starts in May, and then we would know back results sometime in the fall. Again, that October date is when they would be picking structures. The normal time frame for that program is to place them on a 3-year plan, and that's basically just recognizing that from the start of design on a bridge project to the time when you start construction, it's a pretty lengthy time frame in most cases. You've got permitting to do, you've got a lot of design decisions to make, things like that. So the normal design process is about 2 years. However, MDOT doesn't rigidly hold to that all the time. We've been successful a number of times in saying we want to move this project ahead. We're funded in 2023. We'd really like to build it in 2021. What do you think? And we've been successful in doing that because what they are trying to do is use the money that they get from the federal government to justify the need. Obviously, Michigan has a lot of need out there. They want to keep that pipeline going. So by moving projects ahead, we can make up for projects that get delayed by utilities or wetlands or other things that can hamper a bridge project. So a best case scenario here would be we could start design already in 2020 ahead of even knowing if we've got funding, and have it ready for MDOT to review as soon as those decisions are made. That would mean the city would kind of go out on a limb there. So it would really depend on what the urgency is, but design could begin, really anytime in 2020. And then potentially, as long as MDOT says go, we could start construction in spring 2021. Not quite as quick as the emergency process, but pretty close. It's aggressive. It's got some ifs in there, but that is potentially what it could look like. And again, we've got a little case study just to show. This is probably familiar to some of you. The Blue Star Highway Bridge over the Kalamazoo River is the only local connection between Saugatuck and Douglas. Point out one detail because this is kind of the heart of this project. They have your interesting details are up above, theirs were down below. This is a 1930s era MDOT bridge. They've gone through the same story as you did. It's got a lot of parallels. So these girders are 1930s vintage. This pier is 1930s vintage. They're carrying the load to the ground with just 2 columns here, and they have this unique cap. This is not all concrete, solid concrete. This is a concrete jacket, just like your pier columns are a concrete jacket. This is just protecting some riveted steel girders inside. And what we found is this is the top of one of those riveted steel girders. So really bad situation once we got to those with MDOT. This is one of MDOT's underbridge vehicle operators holding that up for us. And so you can see that got dropped from no load restrictions to 25-ton load restrictions in about 2007, which was a shock. This is the only route between the two on Blue Star Highway there. So a lot of commercial traffic using that. So in that one, we submitted the bridge program application in 2008. We started a design study. This was kind of a complicated design. because of some of those details. So we did a design study before we launched into design. We did that starting in 2009. Again, you can see this is MDOT's vehicle that they use to get us around to see what we need to see. And then a preliminary design completed 2011. You can see that's a fairly long window for a design project, but this was fairly complicated. You can see the cranes on the bridge. We were able to do this project part width so that we kept traffic on half of it, again, because it's the only crossing. The detour was pretty lengthy. And what we ended up with basically was a third support. We cut a hole in the deck and then built a third support. Those are the two original. The cap didn't really change. We've just got something to hold that middle up. Then you can see that's what it looks like at the end. But again, note the timeline. This is 2008 to 2012. This is kind of the other end of the spectrum on time frames. So managing risk. Once we come up with some more data, how does City Council take that into account? Every piece of infrastructure in the city has some risk, whether it's a sidewalk that's broken or a water main that could break, or your wastewater treatment plant and the environment. Bridges fall on the higher end of that spectrum because it's really a safety risk. There's obviously several collapses throughout the United States over the years, so that's what all of us are really trying to avoid. And that's really what the city's trying to avoid. It's much better to be on the news for closing a bridge than having a vehicle have a bad accident. So the first one there, further evaluation, just what we talked about. Peel off the top asphalt so we can really get a better idea of what's happening underneath. Again, that would come with increasing load restrictions, more frequent inspections. We would probably rely on the DPW to do a more formalized evaluation of it. They're looking at that bridge all the time. We would probably want them to be tracking a little bit more what they're seeing, just so we can document what's happening with it over time. And then load testing. Most of these are really focused on the tops of the beams. Load testing would be something we could do if the bottoms of the beams were to be called into question, the overall capacity of the beams, not the top, a wheel falling into the beam, but the beam itself having enough strength. This is something, this is a project that they did in Bay County, I believe, where they really wanted to refine the analysis so that they could try and reduce some load restrictions on a bridge. So they put some equipment on there to, instead of us just visually saying this is what we see going on, they can do it much more scientifically. And so this is really from the management area. Business management focuses a lot on risk. And so right now we're in the avoid category. We're 100% avoid right now. The bridge is closed. As we move out of that category, we really need to think about what do we do with that risk. We can't really transfer it to anyone else. I don't think anybody else is going to take the bridge on at this point. We're going to accept a certain amount probably, but more than anything, we're going to try and reduce the risk. And we reduce the risk by doing all of these things. And that's really to give everyone in the room, but especially the decision makers, some comfort level in opening this and doing it in a safe way, doing it in a thoughtful way that involves some science. And that's all we've got for you. I'm going to turn it back over to Craig to kind of moderate discussions. Thank you.
So we'll take questions from the audience. We'll just go row by row. So, do we have a question?
So what are the load restrictions that we're looking? We know what the load restrictions are now. How is it impacting the traffic? Is that a bigger issue that we have to deal with? Are we impeding what's going on that bridge because of the load restrictions?
Probably one that I can't answer as well as the city can, but obviously that bridge was put there for a reason. And it was getting quite a bit of traffic before it was closed. I don't know the actual traffic count, but every car that was using it is going somewhere else and putting loads on other bridges, putting traffic on other bridges and roads and things like that. So obviously every trash truck that needs to get from one side to the other is now going around, every UPS delivery, things like that.
Excuse me. The numbers that you were putting out for repairs, 600, 800,000, those numbers, obviously there's some thought into what that is. Does that include engineering costs?
Yes. The numbers I quoted there are really kind of focusing on the bridge. We kind of gave that list of other things. So depending on how many other things and how we match that together, but what I've said is that for $1 million, you can add a lot of life to this bridge, including engineering, all in project cost. I don't normally separate out engineering. In this case, MDOT doesn't participate in the engineering cost. That's a local only cost. The MDOT program does pay for 95% of construction. I would also say that we've focused on the MDOT funding because that's kind of the normal way of doing this. There are other ways of funding, bridge projects. Again, this is a high-profile project. I've seen everything from earmarks in the state budget to do things like this. So it could be a combination of things.
I have a question about grants. Ferrysburg's applied annually since 2016, been consistently denied. What would be different now working on a repair job that would make Ferrysburg more eligible for grant money?
Yeah, the dollar amount. Right now we're asking for $10-ish million. We would be asking for something closer to $1 million. $10 million represents 25% of the statewide allocation for bridges. They simply can't, it's not that they don't recognize the need. Obviously the governor was here, MDOT was here. They recognize that this is a need. There's just not the money to do it. So if we can lower that, I think it'll be very attractive, especially after we've been asking for 10 million. All of a sudden we come in and say, hey, we think we can kick this down the road of several decades by putting $1 million in. To me, intuitively, that seems like a very attractive proposition.
I'm going to stand up so you can see me a little bit better. Anyway, thanks John and Tom for Don and for the great presentation. A lot of detail that was in this report that hasn't been in previous reports, and I appreciate that because it lays it out a whole lot better for all of us to understand. I'm not an engineer by training, except I do have, I flunked out of engineering school after 2 years, but I was president and partner in a company that built reinforced concrete structures all over North America, and then did some quality control consulting on inspection and concrete placement after that. So I have a little bit of a good feeling of it, and I appreciate the drawings to show how this bridge is constructed, because it's very complicated overall, and it's kind of unique in the number of spans that it has. The ones you showed for repair had fewer than that. But I want to give you the good news first, and that is, and the categories that need the most attention are the surface and deck, which are almost one and the same. The stringers, a couple of them that needed help in there, and then maybe some work on the piers after that. We don't know the condition until we do some further testing, obviously. I think that's the next step. Now, we are where we are. We can argue all day about how we got here, and that doesn't do us any good, so here we are. Council voted to shut the bridge down because they had serious concerns about it. I'm not an elected member of City Council. I didn't have to make that decision. I may not have come to the same conclusion, but that's beside the point. So the next, I think the one thing that was said, though, there was a verbal comment made at that meeting when the last report was made that the bridge is deteriorating 60% faster than the earlier one. Nowhere in that was that written in the report. It was a verbal comment given offhand, and I'm quoting Council Member DeWitt now because I wasn't at the meeting who said that, and was verified later. And I think that threw Council into more of a tizzy about, boy, something is really wrong here. They had to do something. So they're in risk management. I'm not. So therefore, I'm not going to second guess what City Council did. I think from here forward though, the box beams seem to be in pretty good shape, except we don't know about top flange, but the bottom flange seems okay. When you see one of those stringers that's corroded underneath there, remember that each one of those box beams has 17 stringers on the bottom, 181 across. The whole bridge has 1,500 of those, so if one goes, that doesn't mean they're all going. So that's the good news. The second part that I wanted to say is, I think from here forward, City Council has made a decision. Now, for them to do further action, I think further evaluations needed, further study, and also further support from the citizens of the city of Ferrysburg on saying, okay, we want you to move forward and do these things, as opposed to getting into a pissing match.
Okay, questions. We'll just take questions for the engineer now.
Hi, Jerry Brown, and my question is, I understand the grants, we've had a problem, but can we sell municipal bonds? That's the only thing I've been wondering. I thought we could float bonds for a bridge, or not?
Bonds would come following a millage, and that the city has attempted already once, yeah, but that would be you would need something to pay those bonds back, and the city's road funding allocation is nowhere near enough to do that.
I'm curious as to how much a snowplow, Ottawa County snowplow, weighs. If there's a 20,000 pound or ton restriction on that, can it be plowed in the wintertime?
Matt, can you help me with that? What's the weight of a snowplow? I'm sorry? 37 ton, that's loaded?
Just under 20 tons. Yep.
Okay.
So would the restrictions be lowered to 20 restrictions once it is completed, or would they go up?
Once completed, if we were to do that last option, a structural, we would be adding strength to the bridge, and we have some flexibility to design it to a certain load. So we would definitely take into account things like snow plows and everything. Our goal would be to get it higher than 20 tons.
Do I understand that that the citizens of Ferrysburg have to vote for a millage increase before you can have a special purpose bond issue?
Boy, you're getting into some financial questions now. That's probably one I should not answer, because I would be speaking.
Is there anybody that could answer that question?
So depending on the bond, if we took a $10 million bond out to pay for that, you're talking probably 4.5 mils for each person to pay that back, each property. So the voters of the city would need to approve that increase in millage. Right, and you still need to pay it back, though. You still need something to pay it back with.
Okay. Have you received proposals?
No, we have not.
Okay. Is there going to be a millage on a ballot still?
Not at this time. Nothing in this year. Fourth row.
Maybe it's a question again for Craig. What can the city do to fund enough of the evaluation so that we can get the bridge open while they go through the grant application process and financing?
That's going to have to be a city council decision whether they want us to do more work on it to do further testing. So on October 7th, city council will look at this, have it on an agenda of next steps regarding this inspection.
Just as a solution to, on a temporary basis, why couldn't you drop the weight restriction down to, say, 4 tons, be 8,000 pounds, which is 1/5 of what it currently is, with the exception for a snowplow or whatever. Drop the speed limit down when you're crossing that bridge to maybe 15 miles an hour, so if something happened, it wouldn't be catastrophic, and then proceed in that direction. When the governor was here, she was talking about global warming. I heard it with my own ears. I wasn't sure what the bridge had to do with global warming, but if you were talking about global warming, each gallon of gasoline, 6,000 cars times 4 miles extra a day, that's 24,000 miles. 20 miles per gallon per car, that's 1,200 gallons of gas. Each gallon of gas creates, each gallon of gas creates a ton of CO2, which is right in her wheelhouse. And it's 23,000 pounds of CO2 every day because of this closing.
Those are good calculations. I feel like we might need to switch seats.
I'm just, I'm using her own logic.
Yeah.
I mean, we are putting, and we've had this closed for now, what, 2.5 months? And so now you put 700,000 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere.
I don't disagree with you. I will say a few things. First of all, when public safety is involved, I will never criticize a community for, doing what they need to feel comfortable. The load rating on the bridge, when it was posted at 20 tons, that was again based on the condition of the beams to get from this pier to this pier to carry the overall load. The concern was a wheel falling, actually punching through the beams. It's a valid concern. We don't know what those look like.
That's why I said just restrict the speed to 10 or 15 miles an hour across the bridge.
Yeah, and that's more of a public policy decision.
I mean, that is I'm working towards a solution. I'm not trying to criticize anybody. I'm just trying to think this is a solution. Drop the weight limit down to 4 tons, with the exception of snow plows, or maybe an emergency vehicle.
Yeah, and I think that's really what those further evaluations are aimed at doing.
And if you do 4 tons, that takes care of any SUV, Cadillac, Escalade, Suburban, whatever, pickup truck. That carries all of that. Dump trucks, garbage trucks, that truck. And weight is what causes load. So
I'm going to ask the audience a question real quick. How many people in this room right now live in either Grand Haven, Spring Lake, Fruitport? Okay. That's an interesting statistic, and it kind of goes home to my point, is that this isn't a Ferrysburg issue. This is a regional issue. And so I know the city council has already had some conversations, but I think collectively we need to expand those conversations so the city of Ferrysburg isn't bearing the brunt of the cost, because everybody in this area is affected by it. And I think also from a grant application with MDOT or other sources, it would be an attractive situation that multiple cities are making this request. So this is a regional situation.
I will say that one thing your neighboring communities can do to really help your cause, really the bridge itself is the city of Ferrysburg, and every community deals with this on their own basically. But what your neighbors can do to help you is get your elected representatives to issue letters of support for the city's application. Ottawa County Road Commission, things like that express just that it's not just the city of Ferrysburg. We're not just sinking $10 million into Ferrysburg. We're doing that, for a broader community.
I just wanted to make sure I was understanding this application that's put in currently that we're supposed to know on October 14th is for up to $1 million. So you could just explain that application that we're supposed to hear about on October 14th?
Yeah, good, very good question. The application that went in this past May is for complete replacement of the bridge. So it is the full amount to replace the bridge. And again, that's the desired option. By all means, we would love to see that bridge get replaced.
Asking for less, I guess I just need you to explain that again.
Yeah,
please.
and now if we change course, the time to do that would either be through the emergency process once we hear back, or through the normal process in 2020.
Okay.
For the Council of Ferrysburg, would it be inappropriate to consider a millage request for $1 million? The likelihood of the $10 million award seems pretty slim. The $1 million more likely, but even then you're talking about a couple more years. Would it make sense to, we already had a millage for 4 or 5 million got last year? 3 million? Or 3 mils? I mean, could we consider that for the November ballot so that we were proactive on funding?
It's too late to put anything on November ballot this year, but City Council can consider that for the future elections in 2020. I think it'll be next one, be March or May. I'm going by roll first. 4th row. Sir?
Just a basic question. So if they do that further inspection to check the beams, to check the beams, if they do that other inspection and they find that they're not horrible, will cars lowering the load of the weight be able to use the bridge this fall?
Yeah, that would be the hope. If we do that evaluation, we find we've got, you know, some significant good concrete, that would be our report to the city, and then, you know, they can take that into account and yeah. Yep.
Last row. Last row. Back row.
I got a comment and a question. I mean, I don't think there's anybody here that would object to paying for more testing. I mean, thus far, decisions have been made with no data to support the decisions. So I think we need to do some more testing, find out exactly what we've got, then make engineering judgments based off those data points. But my real question is, and you probably can't answer it, how many bridges in this state or country are in service with very little restrictions that are rated as bad as this or worse?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot across the country, and there's a lot in our state. Our state is notorious for ugly bridges, but a lot of them have had some more investigation done to make sure that, you know, you go to the east side of the state, you have a lot of bridges that they've done a lot of this analysis. They've got plywood, you know, catching all the falling concrete, stuff like that. So to do it, more needs to be done really to get to that point. Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I guess to put it in perspective, you know, if I was not an engineer and I was sitting, you know, making that hard decision and saw my bridge over the last 10 years doing what it's doing, I think I would be very nervous too. Just to context. Yeah. Yeah, and really what they've provided is some time to do the engineering, to do the math while, you know, not leaving it open to risk.
Thank you. Great presentation, great data. Council Craig, thank you. That I'm just appreciative that we're all here and having some great discussions. So I would support fully the council moving quickly to get the additional studies done, as the gentleman was just saying. Question then, if we can use your number, which is a number I was using, it's $1 million, and we buy 15 or 20 years. Gives us plenty time, I don't know if plenty is the right word, but it gives the community time to start budgeting for what this looks like in 15 or 20 or 25 years. In the interim, we get the bridge back, and to your comment, ma'am, maybe already this fall. So at $1 million, Craig, we've got 3,500, is the population 3,500, or do we have 3,500 households? I'm just trying. So someone do the quick math, but isn't that like 700? Am I way off? $700? Not to belittle $1 million, but it seems like that divided across our community isn't very much at all. and I gotta believe you would have support for that. So thank you.
Your math, your mental math is much better than mine. $666 a household.
So one of my questions is, what is that breakdown between the 1,500? How many of those houses are homesteaded versus non-homesteaded? My husband and I own 2 non-homesteaded, so we pay substantially more taxes. Our neighbor owns 5. So of those 1,500 houses, what portion is non-homesteaded because they're actually paying a higher percent of taxes?
I don't have that figure with me right now, but to the non-homestead is paying a higher millage rate for the school system. They're paying the operating school millage, so it doesn't go, any of that homestead, non-homestead doesn't go to the city.
So it looks like there's some pretty reasonable options and some testing coming up. And I just wanted to confirm with Craig, if City Council does approve those, that further testing, there is a bridge fund, and it has, what, 100,000 or 160,000-ish in it right now that could cover those expenses?
City Council has earmarked about $130,000 for the bridge right now. Okay, we'll take second questions now. Oh, I'm sorry.
Right now, we're looking at a lot of controversy over Smith's Bridge. What's going on with Ridge Avenue? The Ridge Avenue Bridge.
We get that inspected every 2 years, and last inspection just showed routine maintenance on it. And that was done back in 2010, 12. Yeah.
I have a question for you. If you lived here and you lived in our community, knowing what you know, would you keep the bridge open so we can at least drive on it? I guess I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I'd like your opinion.
Yeah. I will say that now that it is closed, there's certainly a heightened awareness. There's certainly a heightened, bar that we need to cross to get it back open to traffic.
We know that's right.
It's a much different risk scenario now than it was, back in June. Well, because now we're actually taking positive action to do something, and that action could have very bad, implications.
Oh, if we
results.
opened it, driving on it could
If
make
City
it-
Council were to open it and then something did happen, that's even worse than if they had just left it open and something happened, in my mind.
Anybody for a first question yet? Second question. Anybody have a second question?
Do you know how far those beams go down into the water? How far they go down? Because I know that they had to go down a long ways to get solid ground because that's all mud there.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's called the Bayou for a reason.
Well, you said the lake earlier, but it is really Smith Bayou.
Right, exactly. I'm sure it is deep. I didn't have the construction records, that detailed, but yeah,
I
I'm
do
sure
know
it's very long.
because my dad worked for the road commission for 45 years, and they had to go down almost 400 feet before they hit solid ground.
No kidding. Yeah.
Then because it's all mud there. Because you didn't see the first bridge before they built this one.
Sure.
The first bridge was like this, a one-lane bridge, and it was like this. And I know, I've lived here all my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when they before they started on this bridge they have now, they went down. They had to go down 400 feet before they hit solid ground because that's all mud there.
Thank you. Other questions?
Does the council make this decision on which we do, or the people? How do we make a decision on the $10,000 or the, how do we get a decision?
It will be a council decision.
A couple of questions about the testing. So there's 2 options for the testing in there. You outlined both of them. Are you suggesting that you do one or the other? Or are you suggesting that both are done concurrently? what exactly is your recommendation for further testing?
Yeah, you could certainly do both if that was the direction city wanted to go with it. I personally prefer we called it the semi-destructive testing. We're peeling off the layer of asphalt. That's destructive, but the rest of it is non-destructive testing. And the reason I like that is it still gives us good information, but we're not poking holes in we're not making the problem worse, basically.
And I want to say this, Craig just confirmed that City Council is going to make this decision if we're going to proceed with further testing. If you as a citizen are approve of further testing, you need to let City Council know that. They need to know how you feel as a citizen, because you don't get to vote on this. City Council gets to vote on this. So make your opinion known to City Council if you support further testing.
Other questions?
Will this be on the agenda for the next council meeting?
October 7th. Other questions?
An open meeting for the.
Oh, yeah. Open's welcome.
I just have a comment for you, which is thank you very much. It was really helpful to hear all this. And I just have a question, Craig, for you. I don't know what the communication methods are for the council or for the city, because my impression is, and I'm blaming that the council got it wrong, it was such a shock when it all happened. I think it's just, I don't really know how I find out what's going on. If that's just in the paper, if that's just something else, if we ever get direct communication. So I'm just wondering what the methods are and how we best keep updated.
Sure, we do post our agendas on the city website at ferrysburg.org. If you do give us your email address, we will send you an agenda every week when there's before the council meeting. Other questions? Jerry.
I assume you've known this for a while or talked it over, so I was just wondering which way the council is leaning right now.
Council just got the report, and they just got it August 30th, so they haven't discussed it at the public yet. Yeah, no, I don't know.
I'd just like to try to figure out how we can get our bridge open again, and not in 5 years. To repair it and get it back open, so then we can go further and raise money to build a new bridge later. But for 15 or 20 years use, that's what we need now. We need that tomorrow. Because I'm going north and west and east and south to get south, and it's crazy. It's adding a lot of extra drive time, a lot more traffic on Van Wagner. Won't be long before there's an accident out there. We're going to need a traffic light out there. It's getting worse every day. So to take your suggestion and repair it to the best ability would be about $1 million, right? I think that's where we had to go. And I think everybody gets on council. Get them now.
Questions?
So does your firm help write the grant proposals? And if so, how many successful applications have you worked with communities on and getting funding?
Yeah, we definitely do. I'd say a handful a year. We probably submit 8 or 10. We're usually successful on 2 or 3.
And is there places that the city has not currently submitted funding applications to that we could submit applications to?
They're doing the things that we think of normally. They're doing the things that we would advise them to do if we were, back in 2016. How do we deal with this? There are other places, again, you can get special authorizations here or there, all the way up to federal congressional earmarks and things like that. But these are really the tried and true ways to do it. There are other grant programs out there. I still think, in spite of the fact that we haven't been successful yet, these are still the best ways.
Yeah, the question, I know the grant proposal we have in now is for $10 million. That's to make a decision in October. Is there any way to amend that? Do a quick amend at the 30-day notice, and give us $1 million and we'll be real happy?
Yeah, that's a that's a good question. And you know what? When I hear back from MDOT on our status under the emergency program, I'll ask that question. I've never done it before, but that's not to say it can't be done.
And I'll tell you why. We got Ottawa Sands through a DNR grant of $4.2 million, and that was put in literally a week before the deadline. They don't do it all the time, but once in a while they do. And then they give us $8.4 million over 2 years, which is unheard of. But if the right person asks the right question at the right time, you just never know and say, look, we're reducing our request by 90%. You ought to be good on this.
Other questions?
This is really more for Craig or for the city. What do you think, or what's your feeling about having the bridge closed and how it impacts either the tax values of the properties around it or the vision that the city has for development?
We've talked to the assessor about that, and they really don't have a good answer for us yet on how it affects the property values, whether it's going to go up, may go or go down. We don't know the answer to that yet. Right, city council is looking at all that when they're looking at the bridge. Yeah. I'll get you next.
I wonder if we could just put up a sign warning them of the dangers, let them go across it if they want to.
It's called the risk equivalent.
Yes.
I have a question with regard to kind of a historical question with regard to this bridge. How is it that Ferrysburg ended up owning this bridge? Because as I understand, it was originally built by the Ottawa County Road Commission. And I believe back in 1985, Ferrysburg made the decision that we were going to own this bridge. I hate to think that we are pointing fingers at our local representation or our current representation on the council, when in fact maybe we ought to be looking back in history and wondering how it is that we became the owners of this bridge.
Yeah, and before I turn it over, because you've got a better specific answer here in the front row, but MDOT basically has tried to get rid of bridges over time as their routes changed. That bridge I showed you in Saugatuck Douglas was an MDOT bridge until 1980 something, same era. They had a fire sale. Saugatuck and Douglas bought that bridge for $1 back in 1980, whatever it was, and it ended up costing them, $3 million some to bring it back to life.
Yeah, Joe, I can answer your question. I've done a little research on this. As a matter of fact, I talked with Leon Still a couple weeks ago, who was mayor at the time that the city assumed the control of the bridge. The bridge was built in we were incorporated as a city in 1963, and we didn't have any DPW at that time. We had no snowplows. We had nothing to take care of the roads. There was a contract entered into with the County of Ottawa to maintain the roads and bridges in the city of Ferrysburg. It got to be 1985, and the county said, we're no longer going to renew that contract. You're on your own. So in order to get Public Act 51 funds from the state to help with the maintenance on the roads, we had to take possession of that bridge, and we brought the bridge and part of Pine Street and from Ridge on due. There was extra stuff in there for $1. And we had to get it. At that time, I think it was, what's his name, the former fire chief that had to go to Lansing to pick up 2 used dump trucks with snowplows on them, and they were our first 2 DPW vehicles at that time. So, and this is the same time, 85, when the Ottawa County Road Commission also gave up 8 parks to form the Parks Commission, and one of them was North Beach out here too. So there was a lot going on at the time. They said, not renewing the contract, you're on your own. So the city of Ferrysburg literally had no choice.
Questions? Other questions for the engineers? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. We learned a lot. John, Don, thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming out.
This is
Appreciate it.
Councilmember Maxwell.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Thanks.
glad you're here.
Most councils.
Thanks for coming. That would be nice if you could do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you surprised that I knew how far